Right now, deeper than sunlight has ever reached, there's a crack running down the middle of the ocean. It is longer than any mountain range on land, and along it, brand new ground is being made as you listen. Picture the floor of the Atlantic, miles below the waves, in total darkness. For almost all of human history, nobody had any idea what was down there. Sailors guessed it was flat, a featureless muddy plain, the kind of dull, even bottom you might picture in a bathtub the size of the world. They were completely wrong. Down there is the largest single feature on the surface of this planet, a chain of underwater mountains that wraps the globe like the seam on a baseball. And we have a map of that hidden world. You have almost certainly seen it, on a classroom wall, in a documentary, that wrinkled landscape of ridges and trenches under all the blue. Here is the part no one tells you. Almost every map of the ocean floor you have ever seen traces back to one woman's hand. She drew it. She worked out what it meant, and when she told the men she worked with what she had found, one of them called it girl talk, and made her erase the whole thing and start over. Her name was Marie Tharp. And the thing she found, the crack down the spine of those underwater mountains, turned out to be one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century. It is the reason we know the continents move. It is the reason we understand earthquakes and volcanoes, and why the map of the world is slowly, constantly rearranging itself under your feet. The ground you are standing on right now is riding on a slab that was in part born along that crack. And the woman who first saw it was not allowed on the ships that gathered the data. She was not allowed to go to sea at all. She mapped the bottom of the ocean from a desk, from columns of numbers handed to her by men who got to do the sailing. So here is where we are going. How do you draw a landscape that no human eye has ever seen, in the dark, under 3 miles of water? What exactly did she find down there, and why did it rewrite the whole planet? And why, when she was so plainly right, did it take the world the better part of her lifetime to admit it? To understand how Marie Tharp ended up mapping a world nobody could see, you have to start with her father and a lot of dirt. William Tharp made maps of soil for the United States government. He would drive out into the countryside, walk the fields, and chart what kind of earth lay where, which ground was clay, which was loam, which would grow what. And from the time she was small, Marie went with him. Picture yourself in the back of that Model T, crisscrossing rural America, watching your father turn a muddy field into clean lines and labels on a fresh sheet of paper. She later said she must have had map making in her blood, but there was a cost to that childhood. The family followed the work, and the work moved constantly. By the time she finished school, she had attended more than 20 different schools, in towns she barely had time to learn the names of. She grew up as a permanent outsider, the new girl, again and again. It is a strange kind of training, but it taught her 2 things you cannot get from a classroom: how to read the land itself as a map, and how to be the only one of your kind in the room and keep working anyway. Here is something that should make you a little angry. Marie Tharp did not choose geology because the world was welcoming women into science. She got in through a door that only opened because the men were gone. It was the early 1940s, and the United States had entered the Second World War. The young men who would normally have filled the seats in a university geology program had shipped out to fight. The classrooms were emptying, so the University of Michigan did something it had not done before. It opened its petroleum geology program to women to keep the lights on. If you have ever been the stopgap, the one let in just for now, until the real candidates come back, you already know the exact shape of what happened next. Marie walked through that door in 1943 and earned her master's degree the next year. Think about what that means. One of the great map makers of the century reached her field through a side entrance, propped open by a catastrophe, on the unspoken understanding that she was filling in until the real students came back. That is the world she was working in, not a door held open for her. A door left ajar by accident that she was quick enough to slip through before anyone thought to close it again. So she had her degree. What she did not have was permission to actually use it. Her first real job was at an oil company in Tulsa, and the rule there was simple and humiliating. The field was for men. The field, the actual rock, the actual drilling, the place where a geologist does geology, was off limits to her because she was a woman. Her place was the office. She was sharp enough to be trusted with the maps and the data the men brought back, and not trusted to go out and gather them herself. Imagine being told in the same breath that you are good enough to handle the work and not the right sort to be seen doing it. That was her daily reality. So she did something that tells you everything about her. Stuck at a desk, she went and earned a second degree, this time in mathematics, in her own time, while she worked. She kept making herself more qualified for a job nobody would fully give her, the kind of treadmill you may know too well. And in 1948, that stubbornness paid off in a way she could not have predicted. She moved to New York and talked her way into a brand new research lab at Columbia University, a place obsessed with a frontier almost no one had explored, the floor of the deep ocean. I want you to sit for a second with how little anyone knew about the sea floor in 1948, because it is genuinely hard to believe now. You can pull up a map of the moon on your phone right now. We had charted every coastline, mountain, desert, and river you could point to, and yet the largest single environment on Earth, the 70% of the planet that hides under the oceans, was very nearly a blank. People had measured scattered depths here and there by lowering weighted ropes over the side of a ship, one painstaking point at a time. But a real map, a picture of the actual shape of the bottom, it did not exist. Think about that. For the entire history of our species, right up until your grandparents' time, the single biggest piece of the surface of the world under you was a mystery. Not the far side of the moon, not the bottom of the sea on some other planet. Here, on the world under your feet, the place was a void on the map, and into that void walked a young woman who was, once again, not allowed to actually visit it, because the lab had research ships, and women were not permitted aboard. This is the detail I can't get past, and I think it should stop you too. Marie Tharp's entire life's work was the ocean floor, and for most of her career she was banned from the ocean. The lab ships went out for months, dragging instruments across the Atlantic, gathering the very measurements her maps were built from. She was not on them. The reason given was the old sailor's superstition that a woman aboard brings bad luck, dressed up in the institutional rules of the time. So while the men sailed out to read the sea, she stayed behind at a drafting table on land. Picture that division for a moment, because you have probably seen a quieter version of it yourself. The people who get sent out to gather the experience, and the people trusted only to process it once it is safely back indoors. Out on the water, a man watches a machine ping the depths. Back in a quiet room, a woman waits for his numbers to come home so she can turn them into a world. She did not set foot on a research ship to gather this kind of data until the late 1960s. By then, she had already mapped the thing that made her famous. Having never once seen the water above it, she drew the bottom of an ocean she was not allowed to touch. Now, how on earth do you do that? Here's the trick, and it is beautiful in its simplicity. You cannot see the bottom of the deep ocean. No light reaches it, but you can listen to it. A ship carries a device that sends a pulse of sound straight down, a ping, into the black water. That sound travels down, hits the sea floor, and bounces back up as an echo. And here is the only thing you need to measure: how long the round trip takes. Sound moves through seawater at a steady, known speed, about 1,500 meters every second. So if you time the echo, you can work out the depth. It is the same thing a bat does in a dark room, the same thing that happens when you shout across a canyon and the wall shouts back a moment later. Clap once in an empty room, and the echo coming back at you is already telling you how far away the walls are. The longer the delay, the farther away the wall. Ping and listen. Ping and listen. As the ship sails along, it fires that pulse over and over, and each echo is one more depth, one more dot on a line. You are mapping the dark by ear. String thousands of those dots together along the ship's path, and you get something no one had ever really had before: a sliced open view of the ocean floor. But those echoes do not arrive as a picture, they arrive as numbers. Endless columns of them, depth, position, page after page of figures collected by men out on the water and shipped back to Marie's desk. And this was her genius, the part that gets flattened in the retelling. You could read a single depth off a dial with an afternoon's training. What she did was turn those dead columns of numbers into a living shape. She would take a single ship's track across the Atlantic and plot every sounding along it, building a profile. A side-on slice through the ocean, the way a knife through a layer cake shows you everything inside. Do this with me for a second. Drag your finger slowly across the table in front of you, but let it rise and dip as it goes, up over a ridge, down into a valley. That wandering line your finger traces, that is a profile. That is what she was drawing, except hers ran for thousands of miles across the floor of the Atlantic, stitched together from the pings of ships she was forbidden to board. And when she finished the first ones, the floor was not flat at all. The flat, muddy plain that everyone expected? It wasn't there. Instead, Marie's profiles showed a colossal mountain range rising right out of the middle of the ocean floor. Not a few hills, a continuous spine of underwater mountains, taller and longer than anything on dry land, running down the center of the Atlantic like a vast submerged Himalaya nobody had known was there. We now know this range does not stop at the Atlantic. It snakes around the entire globe through every ocean for something like 65,000 kilometers. It is the longest mountain range on planet Earth, and almost all of it is drowned in darkness. Stop and feel the size of that. Whatever ocean is nearest to you right now, This range runs under it. The single biggest geological feature on the surface of our world, and your great-grandparents lived their whole lives without knowing it existed. Marie Tharp was one of the first human beings to see its true shape, line by line, on paper. But it was not the mountains themselves that would change everything. It was a small detail running right down their crest, a detail so strange that when she pointed it out, the man she worked with refused to believe her. Look closely at the top of that underwater mountain range, and you find something odd. Right along the very crest, there is a deep notch, a V-shaped valley slicing straight down into the peak of the ridge, a canyon at the top of a mountain. Marie saw it in one of her profiles and made a note. Then she saw it in the next profile, a couple hundred miles away, and the next. 6 separate slices across the North Atlantic, each one cutting through the ridge at a different place, and in every single one, the same deep notch sat right at the summit. Now, if you saw that notch in just one profile, you would shrug it off as noise, a glitch, a bad reading. But the same feature, in the same spot, in slice after slice after slice, that is not noise, that is a structure. Something real was carved down the entire length of those mountains, thousands of miles of it, like a groove split into the spine of the world. And Marie Tharp, looking at her own careful lines, understood with a jolt what a long crack down the crest of a mountain range might actually mean. It was the kind of jolt you feel when a pattern you didn't expect snaps into focus. The trouble was, what it meant was something almost no respectable scientist would say out loud. To see why her hands must have gone cold, you need to know about an idea that was, at the time, close to forbidden. Decades earlier, a man named Alfred Wegener had suggested that the continents were not fixed, that they drift, slowly, over enormous spans of time, that South America and Africa fit together because they were once joined and have since pulled apart. Look at a world map yourself, and you can almost see it. The bulge of Brazil sliding neatly into the notch under West Africa, like 2 torn halves of the same page. It explained 100 things. And the scientific establishment had mostly laughed it out of the room. For one stubborn reason, nobody could imagine how. How could a continent possibly plow through solid rock? There was no engine, no mechanism, so the whole idea was treated as a fantasy, the sort of thing serious people did not entertain. To believe in drifting continents in the 1950s was to mark yourself as a crank, and now here was Marie Tharp, staring at a crack running down the middle of the ocean floor, exactly the kind of seam you would expect if the Earth's surface were splitting apart and pulling away from itself. She had, sitting on her desk, a possible answer to the question that had buried Wegener, and she was the junior woman in the room, the one who was not even allowed on the boat. So she brought it to Bruce Heezen. Heezen was the geologist she worked with most closely, the one who ran the cruises, gathered much of the data, and put his name first on the papers. By her own account, when she told him that the rift down the ridge looked like evidence that the seafloor was splitting apart, that it pointed toward continental drift, he dismissed it out of hand. It looked too much like drift, he said, and drift was nonsense. He called it girl talk, and he told her to do it over. Sit with how that must have felt. Imagine tracing something with your own hand, checking it 6 separate times, and getting back not show me the data, but a word about the kind of person you are. She had not guessed. She had traced the same valley, with her own hand, through 6 independent slices of the ocean. The evidence was as solid as evidence gets. And the response was not, show me. The response was a slur about the kind of person making the claim, and an order to erase her own correct work and start again. This is the heart of the story, so I want to be fair about it. Heezen was a real collaborator, not a thief. The two of them built these maps together over 30 years. But in that moment, the person who was right was overruled by the person who was allowed to be taken seriously. Here is what makes the dismissal so painful. The proof that she was right was sitting in the same lab the whole time. Down the hall, another member of the team had been plotting something completely different, the locations of earthquakes. Every time the Earth shook somewhere under the Atlantic, its epicenter got marked on a map. Thousands of them, scattered across the ocean. On their own, they looked like a random sprinkle of dots. But someone had the idea to lay that earthquake map over Marie's map of the ridge, on a glowing light table, so the two could be seen at once. Picture those 2 sheets sliding over each other until they line up in front of you, and the dots were not random at all. The earthquakes fell in a line, a thin, precise line that ran right down the middle of the ridge, straight along the rift valley Marie had drawn. The crack was not a quiet scar, it was alive. It was where the planet was actively cracking and shuddering, over and over, exactly where she said the seafloor was being pulled apart. 2 completely separate kinds of evidence, made by different hands, pointing at the same line. After that, even the skeptics in the room could not look away. That overlay was the turning point, not just for Marie, but for how the entire human race understood its own planet. Because once you accept that the rift is real and active, the rest unspools fast. The seafloor is splitting along that crack. Molten rock rises up to fill the gap and hardens into fresh crust. That new floor pushes outward in both directions, slowly, ceaselessly, carrying the continents on its back like cargo on a conveyor belt. The continents were not plowing through the ocean floor after all. They were riding on it, and so are you. The chair you are sitting in is on a plate that is moving, this very second, about as fast as your fingernails grow. The missing engine, the thing whose absence had buried Wegener's idea for 40 years, had been hiding at the bottom of the sea the entire time. Now be careful here, because this is where you will hear the story told wrong. Marie Tharp did not single-handedly invent this theory. The grand framework, what we now call plate tectonics, was built by many people across the 1960s, and the mechanism of seafloor spreading carries other names. What Marie did was supply the picture, the first clear, undeniable look at the crack that made the whole idea suddenly impossible to dismiss. She did not write the theory. She drew the evidence that forced the world to take it seriously. For years, the work poured out of her. Profile by profile, region by region, Marie filled in the blank, and because the scientific journals of the day would not print a literal map of the seafloor, since the data was considered too sensitive, she and Heezen did something cleverer. They painted it. Working with a gifted landscape artist, they turned all those thousands of soundings into a single, sweeping panorama of the entire ocean floor, the way it might look if you drained every drop of water away and stood back to take it in. Mountains, trenches, the great ridge winding through all the oceans of the world. When it was published in 1977, people who had never once thought about the seafloor, people like you, maybe, before today, suddenly saw it, the hidden two-thirds of their own planet, laid bare and gorgeous on one sheet. It still hangs on classroom walls to this day, maybe one you once sat in. It is very likely the image that flashed into your head at the start of this video, and almost no one looking at it knew the name of the woman whose hand had traced nearly every line. So did the world fall at her feet? No. And this is the quiet injustice of the story, the part that does not come with a villain. There was no single moment of theft. There was just a long, grinding pattern. Her name went second, after Heezen's, on the work they did together. On some of the most important papers of the era, her name did not appear at all. In 1964, a feud between two powerful men at the lab cost her even her job there, and she carried on doing the work from home, plotting the ocean floor at her own table for years. She was not erased, exactly. Her name is on the great maps if you go looking. She was something subtler and almost more common. She was overlooked, allowed to do the work, quietly left off the stage when the credit was handed out. You have probably watched a version of this happen to someone, maybe felt it happen to you. Real recognition did not arrive until she was in her 70s. Honors, awards, a place at last among the great map makers of the century. It came. It was just decades late, and she had to outlive nearly everyone who had doubted her to receive it. So let me take you back to where we started. That crack down the middle of the ocean, longer than any mountain range, where new ground is being made right now in the dark. The next time you see a map of the ocean floor, on a wall, in a film, in the back of your mind's eye, I want you to remember whose hand drew it. A woman who was led into science only because a war emptied the seats. Who was good enough to be trusted with the data and forbidden from gathering it. Who mapped the bottom of an ocean she was not allowed to sail across from columns of numbers, and saw in them the secret that turned our whole picture of the planet over. Who was told her best idea was girl talk and was proven right by the very ground shaking beneath the sea. Marie Tharp did not get to climb the mountains she discovered. No one can. They are down there in the cold and the dark, exactly where she drew them, still slowly splitting apart. But the next time someone shows you the shape of the hidden world, you will know that was her. She drew the bottom of the world from a desk on the shore, and she was right all along. If Marie's story stayed with you, do me a small favor. Like this video, subscribe to follow the rest of these, and tell me in the comments whose story I should draw next. There are a lot of them still waiting to be seen,